Hey everyone, you're watching We Had That, and today I'm going to talk about the 1982 Eagle Force Shock Trooper action figure from Mego. The Mego Toy Company spent most of the 70s as easily one of the top toy manufacturers with their 8-inch figures of superheroes, characters from Star Trek, both the movie and the TV show of Planet of the Apes, chips, and a variety of other 8-inch action figures of both licensed and unlicensed characters. But by the end of the decade, Kenner had come in and changed the landscape of the toy aisles around the country with their 3 3/4-inch Star Wars figures. Mego had to come up with something new fast. Mego's president, Marty Abrams, noticed the popularity in the UK of metal toy soldiers called Britons. A concept was developed, and by 1981, the Mego dealer catalog introduced the Eagle Force. According to the Mego introduction for the toy line, the Eagle Force was created by the U.S. government to tackle R.I.O.T, the Roving International Organization of Tyranny, a terrorist organization that was driven by world domination. The Eagle Force was assembled from the finest of the U.S. armed forces. Although this description sounds a lot like G.I. Joe versus Cobra, it really does seem like the two were created separately from each other. And if my memory is correct, I had Eagle Force figures before I saw the 1982 G.I. Joe figures in stores. One thing I remember specifically about the Eagle Force toys is that my introduction to the Eagle Force was a specific commercial that I saw on TV before ever seeing the figures in person. More than any other commercial that I remember from my childhood, this commercial really did make me want these awesome toys. Unfortunately, when I finally saw them on the shelves, I was extremely disappointed that they weren't the same size as my Star Wars figures, and most of my other action figures for that matter. At the time, I assumed that since they were made of metal, it was just cheaper to make them smaller. It wasn't until years later that I found out the truth was Mego had recently acquired the molds for a bunch of old Marks vehicles and playsets originally designed to go along with little green army men. These toys were too small to be used with the 3 3/4-inch figures, so Mego decided to create a new line of figures just to go along with the size of the vehicles and the playsets. When they first came out, the Eagle Force figures were the only figures in that size. It's interesting to note that later in the 80s, 2 more 2 3/4-inch action figure lines arrived. Both Mask and Dino Riders figures were also 2 3/4 inches, so the Eagle Force was no longer alone. As I've already mentioned, the Eagle Force were the good guys and the bad guys were called R.I.O.T. Although there were several specific characters on the R.I.O.T team, like their leader General Mamba and the ninja Savitar, the general soldiers for R.I.O.T were called Shock Troopers. Just like Star Wars had Stormtroopers and G.I. Joe had Cobra Troopers, these Shock Troopers were the nameless, faceless masses that were taken out by your Eagle Force team. So even though it was never stated specifically, we were clearly meant to purchase multiples of these figures. As a kid, I had 2 of them. As an adult, I've put together a larger team. Unlike the Eagle Force team, whose uniforms were gold in color, the R.I.O.T Shock Troopers were molded in silver. The Shock Trooper was the only silver figure in the line. The Shock Trooper wore a black hat, a bandolier with 3 clips for his gun, a black belt with a pistol on his right hip, and a pair of tall black boots. Because the Eagle Force and R.I.O.T figures were created specifically for this line of toys and weren't based on any movies or TV shows, as kids, none of us knew anything about the characters beyond what we'd seen in the commercials or read on the packaging for the figures. To help kids have an idea about who these characters were, Mego came up with the idea of including a 1-page comic on the back of each package to tell a quick story about each character. In the comic on the back of the R.I.O.T Shock Troopers package, we were told the story of how one specific Shock Trooper finds his way into the R.I.O.T organization. This man had just finished serving time in prison and doesn't want to go back, so he gets on a bus and is taken to the R.I.O.T training camp. There, he spends weeks learning the deadly skills of terrorism. Once he's ready, he will be put under the command of one of the R.I.O.T leaders, which are basically all of the other R.I.O.T action figures, and sent to work. The last panel on all of the comics is a description of the figure's weapon. The Shock Trooper figure came with an AK-47 assault rifle. This weapon is a real rifle developed in the Soviet Union back in the 1940s, and it makes sense that it would be the standard issue for the Shock Trooper because by the time the Eagle Force figures came out, we'd been seeing AK-47s in the hands of bad guys in movies and TV shows for years. The Soviet Army began using the AK-47 in 1949, and it was pretty much the official weapon all the way up till 1974. Their standard curved magazine holds 30 rounds and are so strong that soldiers have been known to use the magazines as hammers. The construction of the magazines makes them more reliable, but also heavier than the ones our soldiers were using at the time. Over the years, it's become one of the most widely used automatic rifles in the world due to their relatively inexpensive production cost and reliability. It's reported that over 33 million AK-47s have been produced. As a result, we often see these specific weapons in movies held by the bad guys. It's also worth mentioning that the rifles were used by Hasbro in their G.I. Joe Real American Hero line as the weapon that came with the Cobra officer in the first wave of G.I. Joe figures. From what I've read, the Eagle Force toys actually did sell very well in the beginning. By the end, the clearance section had a lot of Eagle Force figures for cheap, but it was too little too late for Mego, who by 1981 had built up a tremendous amount of debt. Although the toys may have sold better if there had been a cartoon, I'm not sure it would have saved the sinking Mego ship. The figures ended up being released by a variety of other companies over the next few years. I'm curious to hear what you think of the Shock Troopers. Did you have a Shock Trooper action figure when you were a kid, or maybe a whole team of them? What did you think of them back then? What do you think of them now? Were they a favorite enemy, or were you more interested in specific characters in the line? Tell me in the comments below. Also, please give this video a thumbs up, and if you have a chance, it would be great if you would share it on social media. If you enjoy my content, please subscribe to my channel and hit that notifications bell so you'll be notified when I post new videos. As always, thanks for watching.